So yeah, I would definitely, if I was to approach Star Trek, I think it would probably be through that kind of lens, like you say, the kind of diplomacy, courtroom. That's one thing. That's one of my big pitches for Star Trek would be to do something as a legal drama.
Thomas Was Alone is one of indie gaming's landmark classics, and with a Switch port now out, I sat down with the director, Mike Bithell, to talk about its legacy, Star Trek games, internet comments, and my embarrassing teenage stories. I first wanted to bring up what I immediately remembered when the Switch port came out, which was, if you remember correctly, when you released those figurines, they were like small Thomas Was Alone characters.
Yeah, my partner made them.
Yeah, I bought those
No way.
At the time. I have them, not to hand, fortunately, but I got them, and this is when I was a teenager. So they came, and I just remembered that when they came, my mum and my sister saw them, and I had to explain like what they were, and they were like, "Harry, you've bought plastic cubes. How much were these?" And I was like, "Mom, you don't understand, right?" Like that was my goth phase. That was like I was like, you don't understand.
Of all the things you can be caught with by your parents as a teenager, it's probably on the better end of the spectrum.
I was like, "Listen, Mom, narratively, right? Like these make sense. Yeah. Like this is Claire. You don't understand. You just don't understand." But also this is out on Switch now, which is, I played the demo, which is it works so well on Switch. I really like it. It's on so many platforms now. Like we've got it on PS4, Xbox One, Android, iOS, Vita. I think I had it on the Wii U as well, didn't you?
Yeah, it was on the Wii U. Yep.
So what made you want to bring on Switch, and why now in particular?
It was something we'd always wanted to do. I think it was one of those games where, and it's very interesting talking to people like yourself who were kids when it originally came out, and now you're an adult. It's a very strange thing to see your work kind of cross a generational line like that. But yeah, it was always something we wanted to bring across, like from the kind of, it started obviously as a PC game, and then Sony were really good about kind of throwing some support behind getting it onto the Vita and the PS3 back in the day, and from there it kind of kept going. But it's always made sense to bring it to places. The only reason it's taken so long on Switch has just been because we've been busy with other things, and we wanted to make sure we got it right. We wanted to do a good job with it. So it's finding us a moment where we had a bit of space to do that. But yeah, I get a kick out of it. I think it's funny that it's still coming out. I love the idea of this game, will be coming to PS6. That brings me a lot of joy and a lot of pleasure. I think it's fun, and I'm proud, and I'm pleased that there's still an audience who want to pick it up, which seems to be the case with Switch, which is exciting.
Would you say it's like the indie Skyrim essentially?
That's it. Yeah. If I could be indie Skyrim, I'll be very happy. Yeah. I think they're doing a little bit better than us so far, but you never know. Over time, we might have to
balance the scales a little bit.
It's about staying in the game. It's fine.
So with coming back and porting it so many years after it's released, it must have made you maybe re-examine it and think about how far you've come at this point. I was going to ask, what would you say is the best lesson in directing games and making games since 2013, since you made that game?
That's a really good question. I think, because it's definitely like as a director, I look at it now and there's definitely things I would change. And it's an interesting thing when you have the literal George Lucas conversation of like, are we gonna fiddle with this? Because there are people who are nostalgic for it, right? And it's like, it doesn't really belong to me anymore. I can't really go in and change and tweak little level designs. I think the one thing that I definitely think I'm better at is managing repetition now. Like, I think there's a few bits in Thomas Was Alone where you do one too many of those stair puzzles in a row, and it's like, oh, that's a pain. But then I know there are people who are like, yeah, who that's kind of an ironic nostalgia for them that those levels exist and that kind of thing. I think the other thing that I've said a few times is I think I dropped the ball in the storytelling a little bit towards the end of the game. I think there's, because, spoilers, but it's an old game. There's some stuff towards the end of the game where we kind of follow some different characters, and I don't think that's necessarily the best choice to kind of just like make a little sequel at the end of your game and stick it on the end. So yeah, there's stuff like that I would probably tweak next time. But at the same time, Thomas Was Alone's, done incredibly well, and it's found an audience. So it kind of, as I said, it kind of feels like it would be presumptuous of me to assume I could improve it. It would be, I'd be doing younger Mike a disservice by thinking that way, I think.
So would you say that the repetition would be something that maybe aged badly? Or I know I was going to ask you, like, what do you think has aged the best since you've been re-examining it in 2013?
You know what? I find the writing better now than I did before. Like, it's interesting because there's this fantastic thing when, as you age, you go back and you read a book again or you watch a movie again, and you'll notice layers that you didn't notice before. I wasn't prepared that would be true of stuff I wrote. Thomas Was Alone. I go back. I obviously, as part of putting the Switch version together, I've gone back and replayed it for the first time, probably in about 5 years. And there's stuff in there where I'm like, wow, there's some wisdom in this. And it's like, I'm pretty sure I didn't actually write it with all of the intentions I'm now putting on it as an older person playing it. I think there's something about, and this is true definitely of like the aesthetics of the game and you and your plastic cubes, but that kind of anthropomorphic rectangle thing, it leaves a lot of space for you to insert your own readings of characters, your own readings of what the story's about. And I think that's cool, and that kind of encourages you to kind of co-write the game a little bit, right? To kind of come in and put your own little angle on some of these things. And I definitely think that's aged surprisingly well, better than the jokes about arrows through the knee that were already kind of a little bit old when the game originally came out. I think it's a game that actually, and this was never part of the consideration because when I made it, I assumed we'd sell 50 copies, but like, it's definitely a game that's built to age well. Like, it doesn't look any worse than when it came out. It looks exactly the same because it's rectangles. Like, it's got a kind of timeless quality to it as a result of that, which again, completely unintentional, but works really well in its favor. So it doesn't feel ridiculous to imagine us re-releasing this in 10 years from now on a future console. Like, that feels logical. It makes sense. So
you mentioned about the kind of old jokes. I was wondering, when it came out, I was like, are you worried that this is going to reignite all those internet comments saying like, this proves that this studio doesn't need big graphics, you just need these blocks, and that's how you make a great game?
I do, unfortunately, yeah, that I see that a lot, because obviously I get, like, the alerts on whenever Thomas Was Alone's mentioned. I see that a lot. I see I see people being mean to their friends who are making prototypes. Like, when someone will post up like on Twitter or something like, "Oh, I've been working on this for 2 hours," and it's like a rectangle moving around. Oh, Thomas Was Alone sequel. That joke is so much less original than everyone who makes it thinks it is, because I get to see that like at least 2 or 3 times a day. I do think people sometimes go a little too far in their presumptions in terms of like that this disproves the need for AAA art. I see that a lot where people will, like you say, they'll see this and they'll say, Thomas Was Alone's characters are great. Why, you don't need the polygons. This disproves that, you need to make games in that way. And I think that's a little bit of a shallow reading in terms of, obviously, people who want to say my game's great are more than welcome to do it. But I think that dismisses a lot of what AAA is going for. I think there's a different set of objectives and a different set of different kinds of stories you can tell with those kind of more, quote unquote photo real kind of approaches. You can talk in big, broad humanist terms with rectangles, but I don't think you can tell all the stories you'd be able to tell with like a highly realized kind of humanoid character. So I'm not sure that's the killer point that people seem to think it is. And also, just to be honest, don't love to see my work used to dismiss someone else's. That's not a vibe I want out there. But yeah, it's fun. It's fun to see people still talking about it. It's nice to still be relevant, and you see that when you make games, that a game will have its moment in the sun. You do all of the press leading up to it. You'll get your reviews, you'll get your coverage. And then inevitably, like anything in pop culture, it'll kind of fade off. And it's really interesting seeing Thomas Was Alone basically kind of stay pretty steady in terms of its influence and in terms of how people talk about it. So it's very cool to still be having a conversation about Thomas Was Alone this much further down the road.
I mentioned John Wick Hex a little earlier about how it was a little bit like, I think you describe it as fight choreographed chess. And I think you just something quite unique and creative with that as a franchise, because how do you approach John Wick as a name? I was going to ask, in a perfect world, like what other licenses might you want to play with in the future when it comes to game making? Is there anything like you'd be like, oh, if I could get my hands on that, that would be amazing?
There's definitely some. There's definitely, and the nice thing about making a pretty successful license game is people with licenses want to talk to you. So I've been in some weird rooms since then, which has been exciting. I think the one that definitely comes to mind, I think, again, I've said this like on Twitter and stuff, is I'd love to have a go at Star Trek. I think Star Trek that's the thing. That was my thing as a teenager, like that I was obsessed with. I know more about the history of that fictional universe than I do about the real world. There's definitely, I'd love to play in that space and do something with Star Trek. That's definitely on my list. there's a lot. I honestly also, there's a part of me that wants to do something with sports at some point. I'm not a big sports fan, but like there seems to be just so much fertile ground in terms of the kinds of stories you could tell in a sports setting is intriguing to me. And then a bunch of other things that I've been fortunate enough, like I said, to be in the room on, and I don't want to talk about in case someone actually lets me do them at some point.
Yeah, that's fair.
But yeah.
I was going to ask for Star Trek, is there any particular, like, would you want an already existing era to cover, or would you go just the universe?
No,
But
I mean, that could, if you want, that can become half an hour of this interview. If you want to dive in on like which specific moment in Star Trek, there's a lot, isn't there? Like, there's definitely this is, we're going to lose like everyone but like 5% of your audience at this point. There's definitely like Excelsior Sulu era strikes me as like a part of the Star Trek universe that's we've not seen a great deal about. And I think there's some really interesting kind of political shifts that happened in that era in the universe. What gets you from, you know, undiscovered country through to Next Generation, that's an interesting era that's not really been explored in the Trek universe very much. Other than like yesterday's Enterprise or whatever. Here we go, we're going deep lore here. I also I do love Deep Space Nine. I love the Dominion War and that kind of stuff. I think that's rich, fertile ground for some interesting kind of political thrillers. But yeah, I think basically the brilliance of Star Trek and what's been very well constructed by all the various writing teams over the years is there are these enormous gaps of time where lots of things happened off screen. And if you're a fan, you want to know how those things worked out. You want to see I think for me as well, the thing that would be interesting about Star Trek in particular is not to make an action game, is to make like a diplomacy game and politics game, an exploration game. I think there's a lot of interesting genre potential there as well. So yeah, Star Trek, that's the one that I think would be really interesting, and the one that I've not actually had a conversation about yet. So who knows? One day it might let me play with that.
But also, it seems to suit your type of kind of narrative and dialogue-based gameplay as well, because like Star Trek is about a lot of talking to people. It's
a lot of people in room
to aliens. So like doing something like you did with Sub-Zero Circular in a Star Trek basis would be amazing. I mean, that's
honestly, to be honest, that's kind of what Quarantine Circular was. Like Quarantine Circular is kind of an anti-Star Trek in that it's about like it's if you've not played Quarantine Circular or people haven't watched Quarantine Circular, don't be put off by the name given our current situation, because it's basically you're playing as the small people on a planet that the Starship Enterprise has just met. So you're kind of they're breaking the Prime Directive to talk to you, and that what that power dynamic is and all that stuff. So I think that's a really interesting kind of fertile ground. So yeah, I would definitely, if I was to approach Star Trek, I think it would probably be through that kind of lens, like you say, the kind of diplomacy, courtroom. That's one thing. That's one of my big pitches for Star Trek would be to do something as a legal drama, because I think that would be really interesting. There's like Measure of a Man from Next Generation with Data's, his Data human. There's definitely like a Star Trek law show I would watch the hell out of, like just people debating interstellar legal philosophy would be a really interesting thing to play with, and would fit a game again very well. So you go, yeah, Phoenix Wright with Star Trek uniforms. That's what I want to make.
Yeah, that sounds like a perfect nerd game.
That's it. The 10 people who would buy it would have a really good time.
Similarly, is there any particular actors you'd be wanting to work with in the future? I know you don't want to probably spoil anything if you ruin it by simply like, oh, please work with me.
And a lot of those emails, I sent a lot of those begging emails. Yeah, I've been very lucky. I've worked with a lot of kind of big names. There's definitely actors I want to go back to. I loved working with Lance Reddick. I definitely want to put him in something at some point again. Troy is a buddy, and it will probably show up in most of my things. Troy Baker. Honestly, I think there's just a really interesting set of like, a bit older kind of British actors who definitely like. I'd love to see Judi Dench in a game. I know it sounds ridiculous, but like I'd love to see some of those kind of stage actors, because I think video game voice acting to an extent is kind of like stage performance or radio performance. It's most similar to, I guess, radio performance. And I think there's a lot of that talent who would do great. I think the games industries, we're pretty good at going to stage talent, as long as that stage talent has appeared in like nerd content. So like, Patrick Stewart's going to get jobs because he's going to be popular with the nerd audience. But there's such an amazing history of theater and radio actors that I probably would go into that kind of direction. That would be the kind of the dream team. The one that was on my list for a little while was Sue Perkins. I ended up getting to work with her on something because
picture that
Bake Off. Yeah, I was a big Bake Off fan back in the day. So I think continuing to try and find just interesting voices and voices that you wouldn't necessarily hear in other people's games as well. I think that's what I'm always striving for, is to find kind of new people.
Well, you did a little bit of radio yourself when you did North Star Rising.
That's true.
It just kind of came out as a surprise, as many of your things usually do.
Sure. Yeah.
Just launching at people and going, yeah, here's a new thing. Would you be interested in doing any other like non-gaming projects in the future?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think games are where my skills lie. I'm probably the only game designer who doesn't secretly wish I was a film director. Like, there's definitely like, I don't really aspire to that kind of stuff. But that said, like I did really enjoy North Star Rising. There was something cool about putting together stories that didn't have to be fun games as well. That was where that basically came from, was being a stats nerd, I was kind of keeping an eye on how things were going with COVID very early on. I definitely got the sense that like we were going into a kind of an unprecedented kind of time. And I wanted to make something silly and entertaining for when that bad stuff happened. So I kind of wanted to make something very quickly, 2 to 3 months. And we just basically internally had the conversation of, how do we make a game that's fun and exciting in 2 to 3 months? What if we didn't do the game bit? What if we just did the voiceover bit? With that stuff's relatively quick to do. Mike has to sit down and write it, but then it all kind of comes together from there. It really felt like a project for that moment though. So I don't know. I definitely liked that cast a lot, and I'd love to do something else, kind of exploring that universe, because it felt like it could be the start to something if we want it to be. But yeah, nothing at the moment, but we'll see. Next time I want to make something very quickly, that might be the solution.
If I got what you said right, when you said you're a stats nerd and you examined COVID, did you try and make a project so it hit at the most peak depressing time of COVID?
So that sounds very cynical, and it's worth saying, also for anyone who doesn't know, North Star Rising is it's a free project. We put it out for free. We actually put things in there asking you to donate to food banks. It was definitely designed to be kind of a charitable project. But to be honest, yeah, basically, like, looked at the numbers, looked at the timings, and went, shit, in like 2 or 3 months, people are going to be in a really stressed out place. They're probably going to be locked down. They're probably not going to be, they're going to be looking for anything fun and silly and entertaining. And there's not going to be enough content, and that feels like it was kind of borne out by events. So yeah, it was specifically going, okay, that's in 2 or 3 months, people are going to need something fun that they can look forward to. And don't get me wrong, like North Star Rising, it's a niche indie thing. Like, we didn't think we were going to make Doctor Who, but there was also, but there's enough people who like our stuff that I thought that might actually be kind of a nice thing for that group of people. And it sounds like it was. Like, it seems like it worked for people. And then yeah, tying it to charity so we could actually do some good with it as well was part of that too. To be honest, Solitaire Conspiracy came from a similar place. Solitaire Conspiracy came from the place of, hey, we're going to be in this a while. What's comforting for me? What do I enjoy? What relaxes me while playing silly games like Solitaire and watching Marvel movies and Mission Impossible? Can we mash those very weird things together to make like comfort food the game? Yeah, it's definitely like the situation has impacted the stuff we're making. I think what's interesting now is as there is kind of very dimly an end in sight, an end to the tunnel, like, definitely we're thinking now past that, and trying to set things up so that we're in a position where our team has work to be doing for years to come. But there was definitely a moment there of like, this is a moment we have to react to and be present for and do stuff to kind of produce entertainment. It sounds very pretentious when I say it like that, but it's definitely something you think about when you're making things for a living and trying to tell stories. It's a weird time to be someone who tries to tell stories and tries to create fun experiences.
And like you mentioned Solitaire, that came out, like, we have this Mission Impossible Spy Solitaire game. Your different projects seem to kind of jump from one to another. Like, you went from block narrative to, I think it was Orwellian stealth game, to sci-fi trains. Like, are these random jumps that you just go, I'll do that, or does the last project you've done like influence what you're going to do next?
I think in retrospect, you can definitely see those linkages. You can definitely look at our stuff, and generally it's kind of pragmatic. It's like, it's solving what we need as a studio in terms of, what are we trying to do? Where do we want to be in a few years? Who's on the team? What can they do? How much money do we have? How much time do we have? All these kind of factors. I think they're never random, but I think because Obviously the game buying audience don't really kind of have a check-in with me every week on what's going on with our business. I can appreciate it seems random. So for example, like Thomas Was Alone happens, that game was expected to be, I was going to, maybe sell it to some friends and get a trip to Disney World out of it. Like it was a very small thing. Then it did very well. So volume is very much that, okay, I owe it to 13-year-old Mike to make the game he would have wanted me to make in this situation. So I'm going to just do Metal Gear Solid. Let's have some fun. So that's volume. So yeah, it's reactive and it's surprising, but I also think we've done a pretty good job of like explaining to the audience that that's what they should expect from us, that we, I know what my next 2 or 3 games are, and none of them are what anyone would expect from us. And that's exciting. That's a fun place to be. And I think the audience has come along with us on that and kind of knows that they're in safe hands, hopefully. Definitely not what like a business school should do. Like what we should be on to like, the 6th narrative-led platformer by this point. Like we should have just stuck to our process and gone forward. But that just seems like a dull way to use up the time we've got on the planet. So
I noticed that you mentioned that the future ones, you're not really what they expect from you. And usually you do have unexpected jumps, but I noticed sci-fi is kind of a genre that links a lot of your projects. Is there anything in sci-fi that you'd want to work on in the future, like as a sci-fi theme in particular? Like, I know you worked with AI, like would you want to work with cyberpunk or the interplanetary travel stuff?
I do like my robots and my AIs. That's definitely a thing that keeps coming up. I think ultimately it's always going to be about what kind of story we want to tell or what interesting area. I've had to be very careful because we do a podcast now and I've got my bookshelf behind me and I've started actually storing books that I'm currently reading, like to my left and right here out of shot, because most of our games originate from me reading an interesting book. To me, the kind of the veneer of it, the kind of the world it's taking place in is like step 2 or 3 in the process. It's like, what kind of story do we want to tell? What kind of world do we want to create from a gameplay point of view? What's the interactions? And then on top of that, okay, so is it robots or aliens? That kind of comes in a little
What
bit.
Is it today?
What is it today? What am I hyped by?
I'm excited to look into your Goodreads account and try and use it to leak your next game.
That's right.
Well, he's making a Pride and Prejudice game, guys, I swear.
That'd be cool though. Right?
That would be kind of cool.
But that's the thing is I'm into my history. I'm into like I was about to say I'm reading this really interesting book, but I won't say that because it absolutely is tied to what I'm doing next, so I'll shut up.
I was going to ask, you mentioned the lessons you've learned in game development. If you had the chance to go back and talk to 2013 Mike about to release his new block game to maybe 50 people, what would you tell him?
Well, I mean, that's the great irony, of course, is if he'd been any smarter, he might have made a worse game. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's definitely that interesting thing. Like, I'm living in the universe where that idiot did what he did, and this is quite cool. I get to do what I want to do. That's fun. So I probably wouldn't want to change the future too much. Definitely slow down a bit. Like, don't, chill out more, take more breaks, hang out with friends more, don't let this become too much of a focus, because there's definitely points in my career where I've gone too much down the work rabbit hole. Not got that work-life balance completely correct. Yeah, I think ultimately I like that idiot 20 however old he was. I like the guy who made 20. Well, how old was I when that came out? 26, 27. I like that guy. He made the right choices and he set things up for me. So I'm not gonna challenge him too much. People often ask me, like, which character from Thomas Was Alone are you most like? Which is a terrible question, but the honest answer is there's a character called John in it who's kind of wants to be thought of as good, but isn't necessarily good. Yeah. And I think that is probably a pretty good appraisal of where I was in my mid-20s. And I think it's interesting to see that being acknowledged honestly in the game and that character being present. It's weird, right? It's kind of like finding an old diary. It's kind of this odd little look at like, oh, that's who I was back then. Okay. That's interesting. It's not therapy, obviously, but it is kind of it's good to be honest. And I think it leads to good work that people connect with. Because if you have these character flaws, if you have these personality traits, then probably other people do as well. And that's an interesting thing for people to explore through fiction. I think that can lead to. I've had a lot of people who talk to me about Thomas Was Alone and express to me that it highlighted something for them, or it changed their view on something, or whatever. And it wasn't that the game was trying necessarily to be, to make a big statement about how we can all be better to each other. But I think that because it represented that theme honestly. I think people found truth in it in their own experience, and that can be very powerful in art. I'm not saying Thomas Was Alone does it fantastically, but I think it's pointing in a direction of maybe doing that. And that's I'm proud of that.
I think when this comes out, I think the port will be out past but maybe 2 days. Would you want to do a little plug and say?
Well, we can do different versions based on how that release went. So like,
okay,
it's amazing, man. The reviews are incredible. I'm so grateful for those 10 out of 10s. Like, I didn't think we'd do it. It's so cool that the game was really bedded in with the community, and to see it beat Zelda Breath of the Wild in terms of the Metacritic is just, I'm so proud.
Huge props to the knighthood, by the way. That was really cool. I wasn't expecting it, but
it's a shame I had to turn it down because of my politics, but like, it was very nice to be offered. So I'm very grateful about that. Okay, we've done that version. Hey, you know what? People make mistakes. And we ultimately, with Thomas Was Alone, did not do our jobs properly. We're sorry to the fans, to the gamers out there who we've let down with this release. I had no idea that content was present in the game. Very sorry. From that, you can cut whatever you need based on. So yes, Thomas Was Alone's out on Switch now. At the time you're watching this, I think it's a really good port of the game. I think genuinely works beautifully. It's a lovely, lovely port they've done. I'm really happy with it. It's got some nice features in. It's got the DLC. It's got the commentary. It feels like a definitive kind of version of the game, which I'm proud of. I think that's come together really nicely. Please play it if you're watching this and you want to have a go. The demo's cool as well. I think the demo, it's quite generous. I think we've got quite a lot of the game actually in the demo, so people get a good feel for it. Even if you're not going to buy it, just play the demo. It's quite fun.
Well, thank you for talking with me, and thank you for making my family question my buying choices when I was...
Like I said, the best possible thing your family could have found you with as a teenager, so don't worry about it. It's all worked out in the end.